Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. I'm Deja Leonard, contributor with the Globe and Mail, and I am pleased to be your host and moderator today for this important conversation. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Globe and Mail's headquarters is situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. My colleagues and I are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would like to recognize Sun Life for making today's event possible. We have a speaker from Sun Life on our program today, along with others who are joining us independently. Over the next hour, we'll talk about women's health at work. Health issues such as fertility, pregnancy, and menopause were not typically discussed in the workplace in the past or in society, quite frankly. So it's great to see these conversations happening now and employers across Canada putting policies and programs in place to support women's health at work. There's a lot to cover, and we have a great group of speakers to tackle the topic. As we go along, please feel welcome to add comments and questions for today's speakers using the live Q&A button on the upper right of your screen. If you're having any audio issues or other technical problems, please use the support chat button on the lower left of your screen. At the end of the webcast, please take a few minutes to complete the survey so we can continue to improve your experience with our events. You will see a QR code on your screen at the end of the webcast that will take you to the survey. Now let's introduce our panel. First, we have Marie-Chantal Cote, Senior Vice President of Sun Life Health. Next up, Shauna O'Hearn, Co-founder and Director of the Menopause Society of Nova Scotia. And then last but not least, we have Michelle Liotta, Vice President of Human Resources, Facilities, and Communications with IMCAN Financial Group. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start off by having each of you just briefly speak about your work and your organization. Marie-Chantal, let's start with you.
Well, thank you so much. Bonjour, good morning, good lunch for those of you joining us through your lunchtime. Thank you so much for sharing this 1 hour with us. So I am the Senior Vice President for Sun Life Health. So I lead our group benefits business across the country and lead our health business across the country. And just to summarize it in a few words, what we try to do every day is help Canadians, millions of Canadians, navigate, access, and receive the care that they need. And that takes a variety of different shapes and forms, and we want to make sure to help every Canadian on their very unique health journey.
Great. Thank you. Shauna, you're up next.
Great. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. This is such an important conversation. I'm really looking forward to engaging both with you and with my panelists. I come wearing two hats. First, I am the co-founder and director of a relatively new organization called the Menopause Society of Nova Scotia. We were established about 2 years ago to raise awareness, reduce stigma, and to really start to understand the needs around the menopause journey for individuals in the province of Nova Scotia. In addition, I also am Director of Community Engagement in the Faculty of Medicine at Dalhousie University. And in that role, I've had the opportunity to really push forward some conversations around women's health at Dalhousie, and I'd be more than happy to share some of those best practices that we have instituted across the institution. So thank you.
Excellent. Michelle.
Thank you. And thank you also for having me here today. This is great to speak about such an important topic. So first, a little bit about MCAN Financial. We're a publicly traded financial institution focusing on residential mortgage lending industry across Canada. And so we deal with a broker network in order to provide residential mortgages for individuals like you and I, as well as through a number of strategic partnerships to support commercial residential lending opportunities across Canada. We like to say we actually help Canadians achieve the dream of home ownership, so that we are solving a major societal issue within Canada. And but I guess the most important or exciting part being within the HR space is that we do this through our award-winning people and culture. And so our people are at the forefront of everything we do and think of. We really are ensuring we're building a culture that is grounded in exceptional experience engaging and a very supportive environment. And we'll get more into how we do that and support this topic specifically, I guess, in a few minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So I'd like to start by really framing this issue of women's health in the workplace. And Marie Chantal, I know that you have some interesting data points on, what women are experiencing with regard to their health at work. Could you share some of those?
Yeah, happy to. And indeed, we spent a lot of time over the last year or two thinking about this particular topic, the topic of women's health, especially as it ties into the workplace. Let's take a step back. And a few years ago, we asked employers why they provide group benefit plans. And we were wondering if it was about retention, if it was about engagement, if it was cost management, etc. And the number one reason employers across the country of all sizes offer benefit plans, it's to help their employees be healthier. In parallel to that, we did research and we asked people, are you looking for your employer to help you in your health? Because it's a good thing that one wants to help, but this the other belief that the employer has a role to play. And the answer was very much, yes, I am looking for my employer to support me in my health. So therefore, what we did is we spent a bit of time looking at different journeys and different people's health journeys and how it's experienced. We were focused specifically on women's health and did do some research on that particular topic. So let me talk about a few areas. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about how women's health has an impact on the career of women. So specifically, 60% of working women said that health issues around menstruation, menopause, and reproductive health could affect their career advancement. So this data is very important. More than half of women are saying that women's health at some particular phase in their journey would have an impact on their career advancement. 4 in 10 working women say they've made career-limiting decisions for health-related concerns or to care for their family. So that's like 40% of women here we're talking about. We're talking about when we say career limiting decisions, for example, not taking a promotion, taking a lesser role, or leaving the workforce altogether. 10% of working women say they have left their job or are planning to leave their job because of menopausal symptoms. And in a lot of cases, these women are not looking for a role in another organization. They are simply exiting the workforce. So that's the first set of data I wanted to talk about. The second one I want to talk about is how women experience health symptoms, women's health symptoms in the workplace. And 29%, so almost 1 out of 3 women have said that they need to lie to their managers about where they're taking sick days because they're women's health issues and they're not comfortable talking about that. So that's a second important point I want to talk about is stigma and how we talk about women's health in the workplace. And finally, a data point around resources, only 37%, so again, about 1 out of 3 women said that their employer provided adequate women's health resources and support. So the summary of this data is basically telling us women's health has a significant impact on women at work to the point where some specifically exit the workforce or make career-limiting decisions. Second point, women are not always or often comfortable talking about women's health to their HR colleagues or managers. And third piece, women don't feel like all the resources are available to them in the workforce.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for setting us up with that. And I'm sure a lot of those stats are really resonating with folks in the audience. Shauna, I know that you definitely have views on this as well. You focus on perimenopause and menopause in particular. What are you observing in terms of what happens with women when they're going through this stage of life while they're working?
Yeah, thanks, Deja. And thank you, Marie Chantal. Such great data of the journey of women and women's health in the workplace. And, when we think about the 3 M's, right? Menstruation, maternity, and menopause, we've done a relatively good job of starting the conversations around menstruation and maternity. But the menopause journey is just opening up in the past 5 years, particularly in the workplace. And when we think about it, that transition to menopause is taking place around the age of 40, between 40 and 55, which is a critical age for women as we advance in our careers, which coincides with some of the data that you've shared already. And we think about some of the symptoms. Those can be their physical symptoms from joint pain, making it difficult for women's movement. There's some cognitive challenges, many women experiencing brain fog. You're probably going to see me experiencing that throughout the next hour, which can make us a little bit feel challenging in our workplaces, especially when we are in senior positions and attempting to be right there to be able to provide the responses, advice, and guidance that we need to do as we move into our leadership roles. And underlying some of it is also sleep disturbances. I don't think we talk enough about sleep. We think about that as something outside of our workplace, but it has a significant impact on how we then perform in our workplace. People think about menopause and they think about hot flashes and night sweats. That is one piece of the story, but we know that there's over 50 symptoms that we know of at this point in time that are associated with menopause. And those impact us. They impact us on a daily basis. And people aren't experiencing one symptom, they're experiencing multiple symptoms at one time. And I really like the point around stigma. I think stigma is something you're going to hear over and over again in our conversation here today. So I know I'll be coming back to it in a minute, but because we're not talking about menopause, there's, in addition to all of that, there's a lack of awareness, a lack of education, and individual women fighting within their institutions for change. And we're also going to come back to that in a minute, right? But I do think that it's important for us to acknowledge how important it is for us to address the stigma, the lack of awareness, and start to really raise the education and awareness of ourselves, but also within our workplaces.
Excellent. Thank you, Shauna. And you're right. We'll be coming back to so many of these topics and digging in a little bit deeper. Michelle, I'd love to bring you in. So, mental health is such an important part of women's well-being and satisfaction at work. Burnout rates amongst women are in the double digits, according to multiple reports. So, as an HR leader, what would you say are some of the drivers of this stress and burnout that are impacting women at work?
Yeah, absolutely. We all have so much on our plates, right? So if you really think about the females in the workforce, we have a disproportionate amount of time that we spend towards family, childcare, elder care, right? The sandwich generation is definitely upon us, and we feel it as first generation, second generation Canadians, but also those who have migrated. A lot of the times family move with us. And so there's always a disproportionate amount of time that women tend to have to support the family broader. So outside of having a professional role or a full-time job and all the health elements that Marie Chantal and Shauna has spoken to that add to us, it's also the added stress of the larger family network burden. And so, as a company, I'm just going to take MCAN as an example. We have 60% of our population is actually identify as women. And so we can put all the programs in place, but if we don't educate, which we've talked a lot about already, and we'll get more to, if you don't educate and gain awareness, and then I do feel that that's huge for the HR team to lead and champion. You could have the best programs in place, but without the awareness, they would be a miss, right? And so I know Marie Chantal spoke a lot about women actually kind of lowering their hand for things like promotion, and you do see that, right? So women have the natural tendency to say, "I've got to be a good mother, a great wife, a daughter, a friend," and so you lower your hand in advance of taking a maternity leave, right? They wouldn't even think about being promoted. Why, right? And that's just, I think, kind of biases that we've had within the workplace. And so we looked to break those down. We saw an increase of women join the workforce during COVID, actually. So as more remote options became available, there was an increase of women entering the workforce. So you'll hear me speak about flexibility and those options. It's really important to keeping women in the workforce and understanding that there are strains and pulling at us through various forms.
Excellent. Marie Chantal, I think you had something to add to this.
Yeah, I just to add to Michelle's important points around mental health, Deja, and your initial comment. We often use our block of business, because since we're a large insurer across the country, to help identify trends, etc. And one point I wanted to add around mental health is, if we look at our full block of long-term disability business, so if you look across the country, everybody does on long-term disability. For men, 30% of the reason for that long-term disability is related to mental disorders, but for women, it's 40%. So there's a full 10% more that is tied into that. And when we ask why, reproductive health issues, caregiving come up as emerging topics that are different for men versus women. So even the data, even to the extent that people need to, because when we think about long-term disability, is the inability to perform one's duties. So the mental charge on women, especially at specific critical periods in their lives, whether from a reproductive health perspective, caregiving perspective, is having a significant impact at work.
Excellent. Okay, well, I want to start moving into solutions and strategies. And Marie Chantal, I'm going to stick with you for a minute here. So I want you to kind of help set us up. When we're thinking about why it's important to support women's health at work, what are some of the risks to women and businesses that don't actually have programs and policies in place?
Yeah, so we talked earlier about long-term disability, which of course is something we all want to avoid, because we all need our talent to be feeling their best selves and at work. So that's one reason. But if we look overall, we're all facing, a talent war or a talent acquisition challenge, a talent retention challenge. We all know that we're going to move into a generation where there's more people retired than people actively at work. It is critical that we retain all of our talent. And imagine, I mentioned earlier that there's 1 out of 10 women that is thinking about leaving their job and theoretically even leaving the workplace because of their inability to perform their duties. So it is critical for us as a society, and it's critical for us as organizations, that we do everything we can to have all of our talent across our entire organizations be as healthy as possible, have access to all the solutions that they need. Again, it's the right thing to do for organizations. It's the right thing to do for a society. And that is how we're going to be able to be in a position where we have all the people that we need and all of the chairs that we need. It's a shame that we're not able to support about 50% of the population that's actively at work. And we have to remember that any day there's about 5 million women across the country that are active at work, and that in the particular segment we're talking about. So that is a lot of women that deserve and need to be well supported.
Absolutely. And then just adding to that, can you give us a few examples of what some of these solutions look like?
100%.
What are employers, what are these supports that they're putting in place?
Yeah. And Shauna and Michelle have already started to talk about the things, but I guess the first one, and you'll hear us talk a lot about stigma, but because there's many solutions available, and because people will forget after this session exactly what is available, destigmatizing is the number one thing that people should take away, because if we each talk about things, we will remember together what is available in our plan, what are the things we can do. But if we don't talk about it and we sit in silence, then we're not moving this topic forward. So the number one thing organizations are doing is destigmatizing the topic. And that looks like even calling things what they are. Menstruation, menopause, not women's issues, not women's things, not women's topics. Yes, they are women's health, but they have names, and calling things the right names. Having leaders, having people with privilege share about their own experience to destigmatize. I'm in premenopause. Shauna talked about memory fog earlier. I experienced that. I didn't know what was happening to me. I thought I had early onset Alzheimer's until my doctor told me that it was a very common symptom, but I only knew about hot flashes and knew nothing about cognitive impact of perimenopause. So imagine if people had talked to me about that, it would have removed so much anxiety from me, and it would have led me straight to, okay, what are some of the things I can do to manage that? So destigmatization, providing the right tools and resources, adopting flexible policies, the benefit plan, and then other ways to address the gap. But I'll maybe just move into 2 other topics. So training is also something important, because remember I mentioned using the right words, where people have to know what the right words are, and people have to know how to have that conversation with their teams and with their managers. And I guess the last piece is benefit plans already cover tons. Hormone replacement therapy is covered by most benefit plans. Employee assistance program is available in all benefit plans. There's a lot of solutions that are available to employees every single day that they don't take advantage of because they don't know that they can use them for these things.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, Shauna, so what are some ways that employers can support women when we're thinking specifically about, them experiencing perimenopause and menopause at work?
Yes, really great examples have been shared already. Maybe just to drill down a little bit, and I can use some examples from Dalhousie University that are probably some of you who are listening may be familiar with as well. So the destigmatizing is really important. So how do we go about that? It's, I would say, starting with education. And one of the pieces that's come out of my research has been how essential women have been to women. We are great peer support to each other. So within your workplaces, is there already a support group, a resource group, or is there an opportunity for you to create such a space for these conversations to take place? There is so little research that is done that we don't really know what some of the best practices are. So there's work to be done here, and your institution may look very different than my institution, than Michelle's institution. So I think it's really important for us also not to think that there's a cookie cutter answer to the solutions in creating inclusive workplaces, and particularly in thinking about perimenopause. So with the destigmatizing, with education, and with peer support, we also need to do our own research within our institutions. We need to understand, what is the problem? We need to ask that question. What is happening here? And that solution is only going to come by asking everyone within your institution, right? So I don't know all of the participants here. Some of you may be from large institutions and others from small, but it is important to hear from your employees. They will help you to define what is the best strategy within your workplace. The other piece, I think that's really important, and Dalhousie's been doing a great job of this as well, has been training. So training our managers. So as Mary Chantal had mentioned, we name what it is. We have sessions for new managers called Menopause Matters. What does it mean to work with our employees who are going through the transition to menopause? Raising that awareness, giving the tools and the strategies to be able to ask the questions, to know where the resources are, is all very important. And on that piece of resources, maybe just to throw one last point in at this point, Deja, is that there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of noise about the transition to menopause. Many of you probably, when you hear women's health, your social media is exploding on menopause. You're going to get all kinds of different strategies of how much protein to be eating, and what weighted vest to be wearing, and which supplement to be taking. It's really important to be critical consumers. And I think that's an important piece that our employers can also be helping us to navigate. So it's not just taking the practice that you see in social media, but thinking, what is the research? What is it that's being told here? And if there isn't, feel free to reach out and ask if you don't know where that research may be. So it's really important for us to be critical consumers in amongst all of this.
Absolutely. That's such a great point, and really important context when we're talking a lot about education, and destigmatizing is really that accuracy as well. So I'd like to actually come back to stress and burnout, Michelle. One of the key elements to support women is men taking on a greater role of family and household care, like you were saying earlier. How can employers normalize that and ease the social stigma around men as caregivers as well?
Yeah, so exactly, alternative ways to supporting women is to support their partners, I would say, often men, but could be just, partner broadly. And one of the things that we did, last year or the year before was we expanded our parental leave program, right? And so we're a smaller company. We only have 160 team members, but this year, actually, we do have one of our male team members taking parental leave. And it's a first, because a lot of the time there is a stigma behind it as well. Will I be forgotten? And am I going to be turned away for promotion? This is not a typical male role, right? We speak openly about the benefits and that flexibility for all our team members and supporting you and your life situation and where you are in order to balance the caregiving. And so, I'm really proud of the fact that in our culture, we have psychological safety, and that safety and trust and communication is essential to our culture. And I think that's why we have a leadership team that's supportive of things like parental benefits that extend beyond just the female population, and so that whatever works for that family, they can adjust their caregiving needs outside of just taking up, at the time of birth, supporting the children throughout the life cycle continues on, right? Children become toddlers and so on and so forth. So we also have to look at practices that are looking at various life stages. And so we have, what flexibility can you do for childcare drop off and pickup? It can't be always the mother doing all of that, right? There, especially as women want to become in leadership roles, there may be some more taking on of later meetings or potential board elements. And so we want to have that flexibility that it's okay for our men to step away as well. And so we have open conversations, and as both Shauna and Marie Chantel indicated, it is all really a lot about education. And so that's a huge active part that HR is in playing now. And we partner with our benefit provider actually to come in and do lunch and learns to explore more on the EAP, our health and wellness account. You can actually put in expenses for childcare support, right? And so it's the fulsome package, but all the information can be quite overwhelming. And so it's our job to help support how can you help others get the information that they need and the support that they need.
Excellent. Okay, Shauna, I think you had something to add here.
Yeah, I just wanted to take, Michelle, such great examples. And I love that the conversations are taking place in the workplace. And I wanted to move it into the next phase, which is around menopause, because just like as you described with maternity and parental leave, is menopause affects everyone. And I think there's this misconception that it's only a conversation. Let's just bring the women over into the corner and have a conversation over here. It really is meant to be all employees. And it's only by everybody engaging in the conversation, everybody being part of the destigmatizing of these conversations, that we're going to truly create the inclusive workplace. And I've had many male colleagues come to me and say, I am uncomfortable with this conversation, but I feel like it's a conversation that I need to support in my workplace. And I guess part of what I'd like to add is we're all going to make mistakes, right? This is all a learning journey for each one of us. Even those of us in my situation, from a menopause perspective, I'm going to make mistakes along the way. But being humble and dealing with how we manage that mistake is the important piece. How we learn from it, how we move forward. And so I encourage all of our listeners to make sure that this isn't a conversation that's quietly happening over in the corner in a lunchroom with only the female employees, that all of our employees are part of this conversation. And honestly, many of those younger employees who haven't thought about menopause, who are on the still in the menstruation and maternity side of life, and they're interested. I've hosted many community conversations where we'll have individuals who are pregnant at a menopause conversation. And I'm like, this is great. And they're like, this is part of my journey. I should know about this as well. We also have males either supporting their partner or supporting their employees wanting to learn. So I think as we have these conversations, making sure that we are being inclusive of all of the voices that need to be at the table with us, hand in hand. Thank you for the little addition.
Absolutely. No, that's so incredibly important. And I think when we're having this conversation, one other thing that we absolutely need to talk about is intersectionality. Women in the workplace have vastly different identities, backgrounds, socioeconomic status. They don't experience health issues the same way or access care in the same way. So how can employers recognize these differences in their women's health programs? Maybe we can start with you, Marie Chantal.
Oh, that's so important and so relevant. Everything we've talked about so far ties into that. And by that, if we give just a few examples, so my partner is a woman, for example, in reality, but therefore even my journey, for example, from a women's health perspective has been very different than some of my colleagues in the workplace. When we talk about reproductive conversations, mine have been very different. And if we compare, for example, a woman who lives on a reserve, a person who identifies as a trans woman, and a person who has a same-sex partner, our journeys are all very different. So even, Shauna, that was wonderful when you talked about including men, but we also have to remember, as we all know, that even amongst people who identify as women, our journeys are so different. So a few things to think about. First of all, back to the conversation around having conversations. We know, and Shauna, I love when you said we won't always get it right. We know that as we talk about this topic, there will be intersectionalities that are not always top of mind, and we will not think about a person's unique journey, for example. So having the discussion, keeping a very open and safe culture allows for that. Also having leaders from across intersection groups. Anyway, that groups that are of different intersectionalities will also have a high impact. I strongly believe in representativity. I know when we talk about tone from the top, I believe that organizations more often will do what they see people at the top doing than what they hear people at the top doing. People will emulate behaviors that they see from the top much more than what they hear. So seeing people across different intersectional groups having these conversations is highly important. And also, just a very practical example, at Sun Life, we had before a product called fertility coverage, so meant to support families that were having a fertility challenge. And then we had a person who wrote us and said a man who's a cisgender man in a relationship with another cisgender man told us that they had access to the fertility coverage as part of their benefit plan, but that was in no help for them. And basically, since then, we've pivoted away from first calling it fertility coverage to calling it family building. And now we include surrogacy, adoption, and fertility all within the umbrella of family building. So two things that occurred there. First of all, the change in language to be a lot more inclusive, because not every family building challenge is a fertility challenge, but secondly, to even broaden the actual scope. So again, tone from the top, having conversations because we will miss something, and making sure everybody can feel safe in speaking up. And third, making it clear that we're thinking about these things by having diverse benefits and diverse solutions available.
Excellent. And I do shortly want to kind of jump more into that discussion around, leadership and the role that they play, in educating and destigmatizing. But Michelle or Shauna, is there anything you'd add when we think about intersectionality and this topic?
I have two things I wouldn't mind adding.
Yeah.
Just to complement what Mary Chantal has already mentioned. I think one of the big important questions to ask is who's missing in the conversation. And just to that point that I raised earlier is what is the question we're asking? But I think who's asking and who's missing. We really need to explore that within our workplaces. And what I often see, particularly in the menopause space, but I'm sure the same could be said across all of women's health, is there can be a tendency for this work to be individuals advocating for change for themselves because we have not approached it from a systems perspective within our institutions. And the challenge that happens there is that we know that there will be gaps because we're focusing on the individual perspective. So I think where we can, as institutions, start to think about the system. What are the systems that we work within? Do we have policies? Do we have guidelines? Do we have the broad, robust resources that we need? And within it, are we evaluating all of our programs? And from the evaluation, what are we learning from it? So I think all of that kind of broader systems approach to women's health is really important. So it doesn't just fall on one person who is on top of their job, adding in, and Michelle was so good at explaining all of the other burdens that many women have within the workplace. This should be something that is championed within our workplaces. And with that championing, resources and supports put around, which will ultimately help us to address some of the gaps within intersectionality.
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about leadership at work. You know, this has already come up in our conversation, but if managers or leaders aren't comfortable with these conversations about women's health, women likely won't feel comfortable to talk to their boss or their colleagues, you know, about what they're experiencing. Michelle, do you have any advice that you would offer for, you know, employers that might be nervous about opening up the conversation around women's health issues?
Yeah, so we actually, because of the small team we have, we've done quite a bit of work around D&IB, which I would say this kind of falls into bringing the inclusivity and the diversity into the conversation. We understand that it can be uncomfortable, so we did some unconscious bias training. There is some biases that happen. I think I would use that kind of interchangeably with stigma and just breaking down the conversation. And that started at the top, right? So we started with, we've done that training with our board as we're a public company, with our leadership team and all of our managers, because it really filters through everything in ways that we hire, how we interact, how we promote, how we performance manage, and how we have a simple conversation. So I would believe, yeah, some of the doing more on that certainly helps. I also find, being a small organization, might not have all the resources to do it all. So when you really get creative and just resourceful and listen. So I know Shauna, you spoke about having a real listening campaign in a way, right? So you've got your employee surveys, but just hearing from your population, they will tell you what's important and start that conversation. And I think starting with an HR team that's open and inclusive as well, and really living that is important as well. So that is something that we've driven from our senior leadership all across the board, and we're measuring and follow through on the feedback we get, and having grassroots organizations like our culture committee to help drive initiatives and have conversations with people and promote what's important to our organization is all helping the conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah, it sounds like MCAN is doing a great job of really creating like that safe space for those conversations. Marie Chantal, is there any other tips you would offer for employers, that are looking to create these safe spaces? And if you have any examples, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. So Michelle and Shauna described a lot of really important things. I'd maybe offer two other things. When we talk about having diverse leadership teams, diverse boards, etc., this is another example where it really matters. Imagine having, a parity at the board or at the leadership team, the most senior leadership team, and therefore having at that table women who have experienced or experiencing or can talk about it within the organization. I think it's important as much as possible that we avoid the they, like we as an organization, a leadership group, talk about them and the they, often not part of us. When Shauna right away started to talk about her memory fog earlier, that created a lot of safe space for me to talk about it too. And now magically, a few of us are talking about it. So imagine if one of the board members for a large organization, a small organization, a leader on the organization, we can see them ourselves, we feel challenges, but we see ourselves, then it certainly gives us legitimacy and feel seen and heard and represented. So I encourage organizations to think about their leadership teams, their representativity, the mix, etc., making sure that as much as possible, they look like the workforce, the population of the organization, and look like their clients as well. So at Sun Life, for example, we pay attention to that. We support millions of Canadians, and we want to make sure that through all layers of the organization, we look and feel like our clients. So that's one thing I'd encourage people to do. And the second thing is ensure to leverage, we talked about some great programs, but ensure that you leverage those. And it doesn't take a lot of investment often. We talked a lot about making sure that people have the right training, making sure people have the right information, employee resource groups, etc. But earlier I was talking about family building, and many organizations have chosen to move to that product, but we've heard from many employees who said, I feel so seen and heard by my organization, who chose to go towards a more inclusive benefit just to include all of us. So sometimes it's not necessarily the most expensive changes, but it's the more inclusive changes that have a much broader impact. We also, it's a different topic, but we launched a gender affirmation coverage product, and the amount of people who don't identify as trans but saw their organization be taking a stand and being much more inclusive. So don't hesitate to make some of these changes that are not very expensive, but have a much broader and bigger impact and significance than you think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine employees, like, they become proud to work for companies that really support a diverse workforce.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. So just a little bit more here. I think, Shauna, you were talking about how, there's a fear of getting things wrong, but of course we all make mistakes. Is there any advice you would just give for like having some of these conversations, whether it is, an employee approaching their manager, or perhaps it's an employee resource group and they're coming together for the first time to kind of tackle this and chat about it? Any tips there?
A couple things. So, one, I'm often invited in to speak to organizations as that outsider to give the menopause 101. What does it mean in the workplace? And it creates that foundational knowledge for the institution. And a little bit to the previous question around leadership, having a champion who's also going to help to facilitate that conversation has been really, really important for those organizations. And then from there, they've developed resource groups, and often with different topics based on the needs and the interests of the participants who are attending whether it be a resource group, support group, whatever they call it. I think the third piece is around celebrating. And Marie Chantal mentioned that kind of as you were just talking, it is important to celebrate these, what may seem like small successes, but they're huge and they shouldn't be secret to the organization. And whether those be celebrating the individuals who are taking the leadership or new programs that are established. So as an example, one of the ones that many organizations, but Dalhousie in particular does have, is they have free menstrual products in most of the washrooms. And that seemed like a really positive thing for all of our students. But for those of us in the menopause world, we're very excited about that because it's not uncommon for the menstrual cycle to be very uncertain as to when it's going to happen, and you may get caught short. So it actually created a very positive result for our menopausal employees, but also the conversation that took place, right? That people actually started to see it as something not only for a younger generation, but for all ages across the institution. And so I guess that I've gone in a couple of different directions here, Deja, and in the question as it was originally asked, but I do think that it is about leveraging the voices within the institution already and going in the journey and the path that they are eager to go in. And women will always tell us where they want, right? We open the door. Sometimes when I'm doing my research, I think, will I actually get any participants? And particularly around menopause, it's filled within 2 days. It does not take any time to get people because we don't get to talk about these things very often. And in the workplace, it's also very important for us, and people feel invested in our workplaces. And they want to see themselves successful, but they want to see their fellow colleagues successful and the institution as a whole.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I'm hearing that we have a lot of audience Q&A questions, so I think we will just jump in and get that started. So the first one is, what would you recommend for someone who is an entry-level role who doesn't have the authority to organize training, or for managers, for example? How can they kind of move the needle within their workplace?
I can chime in on that first, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, I think you can lead from where you sit. You don't necessarily have to be in a leadership role. Leaders can exist from wherever you are now. I would say that I think it would be good practice to maybe link in with an HR team, or if you have an employee resource group within your organization to coordinate, just because there could be some resources in place already, or you'd want to be able to promote perhaps some of the EAP, the employee assistance programs, or other tools that are available to help support the training. But I would say that it would be great to lead this work and not be afraid to do that. And I think the two obvious channels would be to go through an employee resource group if your organization has one. Our organization is rather small, so that's all done through our culture committee, and always open to ideas that way, or through HR, who typically does lead training, but it can be a co-creation. And then I think it would be more enhanced by really being able to promote maybe some of the other things that you may or may not know broadly within your role.
Right. And, I imagine communication is just a big piece of it too. Maybe your employer doesn't know that this is something that you're excited to help step up and, get the company involved with. Any other comments on that one, or shall we keep moving to the next question?
I just maybe add one little piece, because we talked about leadership, and I think to Michelle's point, I think it can come from both. I really love that example that, we are all leaders that are sitting in our workspaces. You don't need to have the formal title of a leader. And sometimes the best conversations come from grassroots conversations. And those are the ones that actually influence the change at the institution. So for those that feel that there are conversations around women's health that you want to engage in, I think go for it. And there's lots of resources out there. You're hearing about some of them here today. There's more as well. So you're not alone, right? Even though you may feel alone in your workplace. And I bet if you put a call out, for a conversation over lunch, that you would have a handful of people that begin that conversation. So I think both from the leadership level is important, but also from the grassroots, and those two will start to come together.
Right. Excellent. And I think there's something to be said for, having these conversations in a formal setting, and then having it, having a culture where you can have it informally, where it's maybe something that's just in passing, but it can really drive change as well. So another excellent audience question that came in is, how can we prevent women, who might be pregnant or going through menopause, from being sidelined at work, as in overlooked for promotions? Marie-Chantal, if you want to kick this one off.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think this one comes with things that, if we talk here about people who identify as women, and the organization can do to ensure that does not occur. First of all, I think we all have heard or seen traditional professional journeys, and women who, for example, go on parental leave, or feel like they're sidelined for the 6 to 8 months prior, the parental leave, and then the 6 to 8 months following, which makes like a sidelined of 2.5 years. And I think we all know that's not how it needs to be. Basically, organizations need to flex more to the needs of each individual. What this does is it allows you to get the best out of everybody, and it allows everybody to be their best selves in the workplace. So, for example, I'd remind organizations to not make it a traditional journey as to how people experience parental leaves, for example. Parental leave should be experienced uniquely by everybody going on parental leave. Some choose to work till the last second, some choose to leave before, some choose to take 6 months, some choose to take a year, some mix it up between two partners, and having the discussion and saying out loud, how do you plan to experience this? How can we support you? How are you thinking about this journey for you versus starting with the assumption, I think is critical. So asking the person to tell us, same with if a person talks to us about perimenopause and menopause, asking how we can support them, what flexibility could they need, and not making assumptions is probably one of the most critical pieces. And I think in return, and if we look at all the research, women, we have not been taught all the time to stand up or to say what we need in very clear words. We've often thought that it was assumed, implied, or we would get what we just like. It would be given to us based on what we deserve, etc. But don't hesitate to say what you need, and I'm telling you, more often than not, it will be very well received. So know that you matter. Know that your organization is probably trying to support you in the best way, and maybe they don't know how to ask, but don't hesitate to mention what it is that you need. And I think those two together will probably make the best scenario. Seeking advice from other women, seeking advice from other people, having conversations, talking to our manager, talking to HR are all really good things to do, but not hesitating to say what we need and not hesitating to speak about what's going on is probably the best thing that people can do, so that they don't jump to, oh, I can't make this work for my own circumstance, without having the conversation to see, well, maybe you actually can make it work in your own circumstance.
Great. And I think this dovetails into another audience question, and Shauna or Michelle, feel free to jump in and also address that last one there. But, someone's asking, how can women themselves, really advocate when they are facing these health issues? So, what are maybe some of the tactics? Is it thinking about what you're going to say before you're making that approach? Or how can they make it easier to maybe speak to a manager that they're, not comfortable, not feeling comfortable speaking with, for example?
I can hop in with one example. I'm sure that both Michelle and Mary Chantal have lots as well. I always think it's really important to have a group of mentors for yourself, not just one person, but several people who you can bounce ideas off of, that you can, you might have written out that answer, but you want to trial it with somebody. It's really important to have those trusted colleagues, not always women, but as we work through this journey as women in the workplace, it is really helpful to have mentors who can give you that guidance. And again, they don't need to be in your current workplace. I think we all know that there's similarities between many workplaces, and sometimes it's nice to have that external perspective. Some people will hire coaches, but a coach is very different than a mentor. So just thinking about who's guiding you throughout this journey, because you want to have a safe space that you can go with your questions, your problems, your scenarios, to be able to problem solve with somebody. So encourage you to have, we call it having a board of directors for ourselves, right? You want to have a variety of people who can give you the various bits of advice for your career journey.
Excellent. And Marie Chantal, I think you had something to add about mentors.
Yeah, well, maybe less about mentors, but more around like how do you break the ice on these topics? And one suggestion I would have also is to remind ourselves that we're talking about health here. So if you anchor the discussion on, I want to talk to you about my health, and here's what I'm experiencing from a health perspective, I think that starts to demystify. Yes, it's a topic that people may not have talked about before, but we're talking about health, and we should in our society be comfortable about talking about health in every shades that it comes in.
Yes, that's such a good point. Thank you. So Michelle, I think this would be a good one for you to tackle. We have someone from the audience asking, what are some strategies to bring men who are in senior positions and might not be comfortable talking about these issues into these types of discussions, besides, attending a Globe panel like this?
Yeah, well, that does help, right? As a first step. I would say broader conversations definitely help. So a lot of the time, you'd want to be mindful of singling out someone who might be uncomfortable with this conversation. So I find larger conversations help. So if, for example, it was a senior leader, you would have it a kind of a group discussion, recognizing it's a safe space. I've also found that sometimes facilitators, as opposed to the HR leader, although an HR leader can help that conversation along, but an external facilitator can help to kind of create a third party, kind of more objective lens to broadening the conversation. And then sometimes there might be some specific support that would be needed as well. But I find that starting out with a broader conversation, kind of setting the ground rules around it's a safe space to speak among peers and so on. And especially if you have an organization that was already grounded in open communication, trust, and transparency, it helps the conversation along as the first step. We have to recognize that, people have grown up in different generations, and it is a topic we're open to speaking about more freely now. And our younger generations, it's kind of a more open topic in schools and so forth. But for some other generations, it will be a longer journey, and we have to recognize that it will be a challenge, and change is hard to think and be open to these things. So being empathetic and recognizing that everyone might come along at their own pace is important as well, right? So I think there's care on both sides that we want to be mindful of.
Right. Yeah. And I think, part of it's just also being explicit, this conversation is open for everyone. You're not sure what assumptions, might be made. And then, as many of you have said, that education piece as well, I think it can be tough to walk into a conversation feeling like you don't know a lot. So having an opportunity to be educated outside of those more formal discussions, I think is super important. Marie Chanteller, Shauna, is there anything else you would add to that topic about bringing, men into the conversation?
Well, you want to go ahead, Shauna? Or?
Nope, go for it.
Oh, I also think if I can hypothesize, because I think you all know that there was research published before on women's confidence gap. The Atlantic published some research about 5 years ago where there is sometimes a lack of confidence coming from women, and that might be a time where we actually flex that muscle a little bit, or confidence muscle, and trust that when we talk about our own health. The first time it might be a bit challenging if the person receiving it is not used to it, but I think that there's room to do it. There's a way to do it, and I think that maybe that we just interject a little bit of that confidence, especially again when we talk about health and when we talk about our own health. I think that. So I'd encourage people to at least give the little try and see what happens.
Wonderful. And we are coming, actually, here we go. We have one last audience question I think we'll cover. They said that Shauna mentioned a training course for menopause. Could she repeat what that was?
That's a very good question. I know that there is menopause training for health professionals through what was the North American Menopause Society and is now the Menopause Society. So there's a very specific training around menopause. And then there are other courses that exist, and we're working on some training for our community organizations in the province to help facilitate conversations around menopause. So it might be those two would be of interest to some of your participants.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we're coming up on our last few minutes here. I know, Marie Chantal, you had one thing to add. And
Yes.
if you want to give your closing takeaway, we'll bounce through all three of you.
Okay, well, I'll tie it into that. There is a women's health toolkit that is available for all organizations for free on the sunlife.ca website. So that might be a resource as well that's good for you, but that's also good for your own organization. It talks about language, talks about the data, what you can do, etc. So I'd encourage people to go look that on the sunlife.ca website, and you will find free information to help you on that journey.
Love that. That's so great. Michelle, kind of final takeaway from this conversation from our audience.
I was just gonna add, check your EAP, your Employee Assistance Plan, because there are so many amazing resources there that will touch mental health, women's health, stress management, all beyond financial. We didn't even get into financial stresses that, women will have and all the education you can do around there. But there are so many resources through an EAP, and that should really be the first stop, I find, when you're starting to explore and research, especially when you're looking for support.
Okay, perfect. And then Shauna, over to you for any closing thoughts.
I'm just going to say that women's health impacts all of us. And don't be afraid to reach out for help. You've heard some of the resources. Have conversations with your colleagues, with your friends. You are not alone at whatever phase and stage of the journey you're on. And once you start opening up the conversations, you definitely feel less alone and you start to find the strategies that will work best for you.
Perfect. Okay, right on the dot. We have to leave it there. I would like to thank Marie Chantal, Shauna, and Michelle for joining us today and sharing their strategies, insights, and advice on behalf of the Globe and Mail. I would also like to thank Sun Life for making this event possible, and all of you, of course, across Canada for joining in on the conversation. Please remember to fill out the survey in your inbox. I think we have a QR code popping up as well. And thank you again to everyone who has registered and watched. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.